minutes from freezing in her wedding veil. A Lakota chief lit the fire before it was too late. The horse came back without her. That's how I knew something was wrong. Not the snow I knew, had known all my life, the kind that comes sideways off the plain with no warning and turns the world into a white wall you can walk into and disappear. Not the cold was just cold. But the horse came back without a rider, trailing a length of rain, blowing hard, ice in its mane, and that was a thing that meant a person was on the ground somewhere out there. I was at the fire. It was morning, early, the gray kind of early where the light doesn't quite arrive, just sort of spreads itself thin and useless across everything. I'd been up since before dawn the way I always am now. Sleep goes shallow when you get old, sits right at the surface like ice on a pond, easy to crack through. I was warming my hands and thinking about nothing in particular when the horse came into camp. I recognized it. It was from the Hennessy place east of here. A gray mare, white-faced, one sock. I'd seen it before at the trader's post, tied outside while old Hennessy stood inside complaining about prices. Good horse. Too good for where she'd ended up, which was standing in my camp looking at me with those big dark eyes like she was asking me to do something about whatever had happened. I got up, put on my coat, the heavy one, the elk hide, the one my wife made before she died. Checked my rifle not because I thought I'd need it, but because checking the rifle is what you do when you don't know what you're walking into. The other men in camp, the younger ones, were starting to stir. I told Runs Far to stay and keep the fire going and told the others to stay too. This wasn't their errand. I took the horse by the rein and walked her back the way she'd come. The tracks were easy enough to follow while there were tracks. The mare had come maybe half a mile through the timber on the ridge before the open plain swallowed everything. Out there, the wind had already gone to work, filling in hoofprints, smoothing the snow, making the land look like it had never been touched. I stood at the edge of the trees and looked out at that white nothing, and I thought, if someone's out there and they're not moving, I'm not going to find them. I went anyway. You learn things about looking in country like this. You look for wrong shapes, a color that doesn't belong, a lump in the flat where there shouldn't be a lump, the way wind presses against something solid and shows you where the solid thing is by the shape it carves in the drifting snow. I'd found men like this before. Found them frozen stiff, faces blue, not worth the trouble of carrying back. I'd found cattle the same way, which is a different grief but still a grief. What I found this time was a color. White on white, so close to nothing I almost walked past it, except the white was slightly wrong. It had a texture the snow didn't have, a kind of shimmer. I stopped, looked harder. A veil. She was down on her side in the snow with her knees drawn up toward her chest and her arms wrapped around herself, and she was wearing a wedding dress. White, which is why I'd almost missed her. Buttons up the back, a long skirt soaked through and frozen stiff at the hem, a veil still pinned to her hair though most of her hair had come down and was frosted white at the ends. Her shoes, and I stood there a moment just looking at those shoes, thin little leather things with buttons on the side, the kind of shoes made for standing still in a church, not for running through a plains blizzard. Her shoes had come off somewhere. Both of them. Her feet were bare in the snow. I felt her neck first, looking for a pulse. Her skin was so cold it didn't feel like skin, but there was something there, faint and uneven, like a watch running down. Alive. I didn't think about much after that. I pulled off the elk coat and got it around her and picked her up. She was heavier than she looked, dead weight, which she very nearly was, and I put her over the horse. Went back through the trees the way I'd come, as fast as I could go and still keep her on the mare. By the time I got back to camp, Runs Far had the fire high. He took one look at what I was carrying and didn't say a word, just moved to make room. I lay her down close to the fire, not too close, close enough. Got the soaked dress off her, which is not something I'll dwell on except to say it was a necessary thing done quickly and without ceremony, and got her into dry blankets. Her feet I wrapped separately tight. because frostbite in the feet is its own particular trouble, and I'd seen men lose toes to it, and I wasn't going to let that happen if I could help it. She didn't wake up for a long time. I sat with her. The younger men made themselves useful elsewhere, feeding horses, cutting wood, not hovering, which was the right thing. Runs Far brought me coffee and set it near my hand without a word. He's a good young man, doesn't feel the need to fill silence with noise. I watched her breathe. That was the whole job for a while, just watching her breathe, making sure the breaths kept coming. Her color started coming back after maybe an hour or a little more. The blue went out of her lips. Her hands, which I had wrapped around the tin cup for the warmth of it, started to look less like wax. She had a face that had probably been arranged carefully that morning before whatever happened. Hair put up, something on her cheeks, whatever it is women do before a wedding. Most of that was ruined now. But underneath it she was just a woman, maybe 30, with a jaw set hard even in unconsciousness, and a line between her brows like she'd been thinking hard about something difficult for a very long time. She came around slow, eyes first, opening and closing, not tracking anything. Then her hands gripped the blanket. Then she made a sound, not a word, just a sound, the kind you make when pain starts to come back into parts of you that went numb. I said in English, "Lie still, you're warm enough, don't try to move yet." She looked at me. I want to be honest about what was in her eyes right then. Fear, yes. That's a natural thing for a woman to feel when she opens her eyes, and the first thing she sees is a Lakota man she doesn't know sitting next to her in a fire-lit camp. I didn't take offense at it. Fear is just the body being careful. What I watched for was whether the fear would hold, whether it would harden into the kind of panic that makes people do foolish things, or whether she was steady enough to let the evidence in front of her, warm fire, dry blankets, hot coffee, a man sitting calmly, outweigh the fear. She was steady. She blinked at me a few times, took stock of where she was, looked at the fire, looked at the blankets, felt her feet which were wrapped and winced, looked back at me. She said, "My feet." "Frostbite," I said, "but you'll keep them, you're lucky." She said, "My shoes." "Gone," I said, "somewhere on the plain. We'll look for them when the storm passes, but I wouldn't count on finding them." She looked down at herself, at the blankets, and understood that the dress was gone. Something moved across her face, not embarrassment exactly, more like a reckoning, like she was adding up what had been lost and deciding whether to be ashamed of it or not. She decided not. She said, "I ran." I said, "I noticed." "They won't," she stopped, started again. "They won't come looking once the storm," she stopped again. Her jaw tightened. She didn't finish the sentence, but I understood it well enough. Nobody was coming. I said, "There's coffee." I helped her sit up enough to hold the cup. Her hands shook, but they held it. She drank without saying anything for a while. The fire talked. Wind pushed at the hides of the shelters around us. That steady buffeting sound that goes on so long you stop hearing it. And then, when it stops, the silence feels strange. After a while she said, "What's your name?" I told her. She turned it over in her mind. Said it back to me, not quite right but close enough. She said, "I'm Margaret." I nodded. She said, "You found me." "The horse found you," I said. "I just followed." She looked at me then in a way that told me she knew I was being modest and she wasn't going to let me be. She had that particular look. I'd seen it before in women of a certain strength, the look that says, "I see what you did and I'm not going to pretend otherwise just because you're pretending otherwise." It's not a soft look. It's got iron in it. She said, "You carried me." I said, "You didn't weigh much." She almost smiled. It didn't quite get there, too much else in the way, but the corner of her mouth moved. She slept again after that, a real sleep this time. Not the unconsciousness of someone nearly dead, but the heavy flat sleep of someone whose body has decided it needs to repair itself and is going to take the time to do it whether the person agrees or not. I let her sleep. stayed close, tended the fire. The storm ran through the afternoon and into the night, and by the time it blew itself out the sky had gone clear and hard and full of stars. Cold like that, deep cold, the kind that cracks tree branches and makes horses blow long plumes of steam. I fed the fire until it was throwing a good strong light and heat out to the edges of the camp, and then I sat back and let the night be what it was. She woke around midnight. I know because I was still up, sleep wasn't coming anyway, not with a stranger in camp, and I heard her stir and shift and make a small sound. I said, "Storm's done." She was quiet a moment, getting her bearings again, remembering where she was. Then she said, "Does it always get that cold?" "Colder," I said. She made a sound that might have been a laugh in better circumstances. She pushed herself up to sitting on her own this time, held the blanket around her, and looked out at the stars through the opening in the shelter. She said, "I grew up in Ohio." I said, "That explains the shoes." This time she did laugh, soft, just a breath of it, but real. We sat there a while. I wasn't in the habit of talking much, not at night, not in the cold, not with strangers. But there was something about her that didn't require filling the silence. She seemed like a woman who'd spent enough time in her own head that quiet didn't bother her. After a while she said, "I met him in Ohio. He seemed different there." I didn't ask who she meant, didn't need to. She said he had plans. He was always talking about his plans, the land out here, what he was going to build. She paused. I didn't find out until I got here what kind of man he was when he wasn't talking about plans. I said, "The kind that made you run in a blizzard in your wedding shoes." "In my wedding shoes," she said, and there was something in her voice, bitterness, but also a kind of wry recognition, like she could see the particular absurdity of it from the outside even if it hadn't felt absurd at the time. "Yes, in my wedding shoes." She looked at her wrapped feet, "which I've now lost." "You kept your feet," I said. "I kept my feet," she agreed, like she was deciding that was enough. She stayed 4 days, while the snow made the plain impassable, and while her feet healed to the point where she could put weight on them. I gave her clothes, not mine, but a woman's things I still had, packed away, that I brought out without comment. She didn't ask about them. She put them on. She helped where she could. She was not a woman who sat still well, even injured. She found ways to be useful, mending things, helping with the cook fire, things she could do without being on her feet. She watched everything with those careful eyes, and she learned things quickly, and she didn't ask foolish questions, but when she asked a question, it was a real one. On the second day, Runs Far asked me in our language what we were going to do with her. I told him that wasn't the right question. The right question was what she was going to do with herself, and that was her business. He looked at her working by the fire and nodded, like that made sense to him. He's a good young man. On the third day she asked me about my wife. I don't know what made her ask, maybe the clothes, maybe something she'd seen packed away that she'd put 2 and 2 together about. I thought about not answering. I generally didn't talk about Bright Water to people who hadn't known her, but Margaret asked it plain, without prying, just a direct question the way she asked everything, and I found I wanted to answer it. I said she'd been gone 12 years. I said she'd been a woman of considerable force and very little patience for foolishness, and that I missed her every single day, and that some days the missing was worse than others, and I'd stopped trying to predict which days those would be. Margaret listened. She didn't say she was sorry, the way some people do, filling the space with words that don't mean much. She just let what I'd said sit there, which is the respectful thing. After a while she said, "She made your coat." "She did," I said. "She told me it would outlast me. She was right, it's better than it was when she made it." She said, "That's something." I said, "It is." We sat with that a while. On the 4th morning the temperature had lifted enough that the plain was passable, and I told her that if she wanted to go towards Stillwater, which was the nearest town with a telegraph and a stage line, I could take her that direction. She'd had time by then to figure out what she wanted to do. She'd been thinking about it. I could tell, I could see her working through it behind her eyes, the way a person does when they're planning forward, sorting through what they have and what they need and what the next move is. She said yes, she'd like to go to Stillwater. She had a sister in Denver who didn't know yet what had happened, and she wanted to send a wire. I said I'd take her. We rode out in the morning. I put her on the gray mare, who seemed pleased enough about that, and I rode my own horse. The plain after a big snow is a particular thing. Everything you knew about it is hidden. All the landmarks you navigate by buried or changed, the terrain itself rearranged. But I knew this land the way I knew my own hands. My father had ridden it and his father before him, and the knowing of it was in my blood more than in my head. She rode well, better than I'd expected given the thin shoes and the Ohio and the wedding dress. She sat the mare properly, and she didn't complain about the cold, and she kept up. We didn't talk much. The plain was too big and the cold was too deep for much talking. Occasionally I'd point something out, a creek that was under us frozen that we needed to angle around, a rise in the ground ahead that would give us shelter from the wind. She listened and adjusted. No argument, no second guessing, just trust. That's a thing you don't always get from strangers. Trust. People meet something they don't understand and they argue with it, or they manage it, or they try to take hold of it and steer it. She just trusted. By afternoon we could see the buildings of Stillwater across the flat, a dark smear against the white horizon, smoke rising straight up in the cold, still air. She pulled the mare up. I stopped beside her. She looked at the town for a moment. She had on the wool coat over the other woman's clothes, her dark hair loose because the veil and the pins were somewhere on the plain, and she sat the horse with that particular uprightness she had, that quality she carried even in borrowed clothes in the cold, a woman who knew her own mind and didn't need anyone's permission to know it. She turned to look at me. She said, "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come out after the horse." I said, "You'd have frozen." She said, "Yes." "That's what happens," I said. "I know that now." She paused. Her eyes were level on mine, steady. "What I mean is," she stopped again, looking for the right words, and what I noticed was that she was working to say the actual thing, not a softer version of it. "What I mean is that you didn't know me. You went out in that storm for a person you didn't know, and then she looked at me. "You treated me right. You treated me like I was worth it." I didn't say anything. She said, "I want you to know I saw that. I'm going to carry that with me." I looked at her sitting there on that gray mare against the white of the plain, the smoke of Stillwater rising behind her, the cold putting color in her cheeks, and I thought about Bright Water, the way she used to say that a person shows you who they are in how they treat someone who can't give them anything in return. She'd said that many times. I'd believed her. Margaret was looking at me the way Bright Water used to look at me sometimes, not like she needed something. Like she was simply seeing me, like I was worth the looking. I said, "You did right running." She held my eyes a moment. Then she nodded once like that meant something to her, and I think it did. I said, "You'll be all right." She said, "I think I will." I rode with her into Stillwater, took her as far as the telegraph office, where she got down from the mare and handed me the reins and looked up at me. I stayed on my horse and held out her hand the way a man would, a straight offer of it, not a woman being delicate but a person settling an account. I took it, shook it once. She said, "Thank you." I said, "Stay inside in storms." She smiled then, a real one, full of something complicated, grief and relief, and something that had come through and was still standing on the other side of it. She said, "I'll do that." She went inside. I sat there a moment on the horse in the middle of Stillwater's Main Street, which was mostly empty in the cold, a dog somewhere barking at nothing, a man across the way loading something onto a wagon and not paying me any attention. The gray mare stood beside me, patient, waiting to see what I was going to do. I thought about the elk coat, the one bright water made. About how it had been around a stranger for 4 days and now it smelled different, faintly, just faintly, of whatever Margaret had put in her hair before her wedding. That would wear out. Weather and wood smoke would take it back. But it was there for now. I thought about what she'd said, that she was going to carry it with her, that she'd seen it. 12 years of not being seen the way Bright Water had seen me. 12 years of being the old chief, the one who was respected because respect is owed the old and the titled, not because anyone was really looking at you, not because anyone was taking you in and deciding that what was there was worth something. She'd looked, she'd seen. And she'd said so plain, without making it soft, without making it into a thing that was about her gratitude rather than what she'd actually witnessed. I turned the horse north. The gray mare came along beside me without being led. She decided she was staying with the horse she knew, which seemed fair. The plain opened up ahead of us, still white, still cold, the afternoon light going thin and pink along the edge of the sky the way it does in winter before it gives out entirely. I rode into it. The coat was warm around my shoulders, had been for 30 years and would be for as long as I was in it. The land was the land, mine in the only way land can be yours, in the blood and the bone, and the knowing of it down past what words can get at. Behind me, in that telegraph office, a woman was writing a wire to Denver that would tell her sister she was alive and free and starting over. Ahead of me, camp and fire and the good dark of a winter night. I put my heels to the horse and rode.